Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you're prone to overwatering your plants, then today's list is going to be for you, because all the plants that I'm talking about today, they love to stay moist. When I say moist, I don't mean wet, so you don't want to keep your plants sopping wet, just lightly moist. But these are all plants that do not like to dry out, so you will want to keep them lightly moist all the time. So yeah, if you are prone to overwatering, then these plants may suit you. Just make sure that you also use a well-draining soil as well, because even though these plants do like to stay moist, they still don't want to be sitting in water, so you do still need to be aware of the risk of root rot. First up, I have this weeping fig, and this one is a variegated version, but I actually have a non-variegated version that I've had for many years, and these plants, they prefer to stay moist. As I say, they do want to be in a well-draining soil, and you'll want to make sure that your nursery pot has drainage holes in so you can drain out any excess water. But these ones do like to stay consistently moist, and you will want to keep it a little more on the moist side during the growing season in spring and summer, but then you may want to cut back a little bit during winter when they don't grow as much. I would recommend using either a moisture meter or putting your finger into the soil just to check whether it actually needs watering. So I'd never recommend that you water your plants on a schedule, like once a week or whatever, because it really does vary depending on what conditions you have. Your conditions may be completely different to mine, so you may need to water more or less often. So just be mindful to check the soil before you water, because even though this plant does like moisture, you will want to make sure that you don't overdo it, so that you don't want it soaking wet. Next is this beautiful crocodile fern. And this one is a fern, so ferns are known for wanting to stay moist, and this one is no different, although I always do recommend this as a much easier fern than other types of ferns. This one is a little bit more forgiving, but it does like to stay consistently moist, and you can give it bright indirect light, or you can put it in slightly lower light as well, and it will be fine. This one will also enjoy a bathroom or kitchen environment where there's a little bit of humidity, but if you don't have any humidity, it's also fine. But yeah, this one does like to stay lightly moist all the time, and it's a little bit less finicky than other ferns, so if you're a little bit worried about the possibility of your fern dying because you haven't cared for it properly, this is a good starter fern to start on, to see if you like the kind of plant. And yeah, this one is definitely one of my favourite plants. Not only does it have the crocodile skin texture, it also grows in this lovely kind of shape. Next up is the peacock plant, and I've had this one for quite some time now, probably over a year. And again, this is another plant that does not like to dry out. This one has these gorgeous leaves. They're quite papery thin, they're very ornamental and beautiful, but this one does not like to dry out, and it will probably end up getting some brown crisping around the edges if you do let it dry out. So I would recommend making sure that you keep this one moist. Again, during the spring, summer, it's going to need a little more water than it will in the winter, but I always recommend, as I said before, check the soil to know when to water, because it all depends on your climate, where you are in the world, what kind of potting medium you're using. All these things affect how often we water. I always say never water on a schedule. I keep on saying that because it's so true. Always check your soil first. Really does love staying lightly moist, again not too wet, so make sure that you always drain the water out of the pot too when you water. But this one is not only really easy to care for, but it's also really beautiful to look at. As you can see, it gives those wonderful jungle vibes in your home, and I've kept this one in different spots in my home. It's not very fussy, it's fairly easy to look after, so long as you make sure you give it enough bright indirect light and you keep it moist. Yeah, it's really easy. Now I have to include the Maranta in this list because Marantas do prefer to stay moist. Some people like to keep them in the bathroom to give them a little bit of extra moisture, but that's not necessary. These are pretty unfussy. You can keep them anywhere in your home really. Mine just thrives on normal room humidity, and I'm always careful to check this one on a regular basis. Again, I just use my moisture meter, check that it needs watering, and I make sure that it doesn't get to the stage where it dries out. And this one definitely doesn't like to completely dry out, and if you do let it completely dry out you may notice some browning on the leaves, so just keep up with that watering. If you're an overwaterer then you probably won't find it an issue, but yeah, this one just thrives on staying moist, and it will reward you with these beautiful patterned leaves. And this one is actually a really fast grower too, so you will find it really rewarding to keep in your home. Next I have for you the Alocasia zebrina, and again this one, although it's an alocasia, it's actually fairly easy to care for, so don't be put off if you're a little worried about caring for an alocasia. This one does like the soil to stay moist. I never let the soil on mine dry out completely. I'll let it dry out a little bit at the top, but I'll always make sure it stays lightly moist all the time. And again, if you don't do this, you will start to notice some browning on them. So if you give this plant enough bright indirect light and you give it constant light moisture, then it's going to reward you with these gorgeous leaves. And I just think they're stunning. But yeah, just keep an eye on this one. It's one that you really don't want to let dry out. You can't really go and leave it and forget about it. So it is kind of an intermediate plant, but it's not as tricky as some other alocasias. I found it really easy. I just check mine a little more often than a lot of my other plants, just to make sure that I don't leave it dry ever. And again, this one is a really rewarding plant. It looks so pretty in the home. It's got those lovely striped stems, as you can see as well. And I just think it's one of the nicest houseplants out there. Next up is this stunning Aphilandra, also known as the zebra plant. And I've learnt the hard way that this one does not like to dry out even for a minute. In fact, there was one time when I let mine dry out, probably about 3 to 4 months ago now, and it basically just very quickly dropped its lower leaves, all of them, over time, and I was left with pretty much a bare stem. So this is how I learned that this one does not like to dry out at all. You can see all this beautiful new growth. It has bounced back beautifully. And this one I keep moist all the time. I am very particular about making sure this one never ever dries out, because one mistake, as I learned, and it will just drop all its leaves. But if this does happen to you, it's very common when people don't realise how to care for this plant, as I didn't. This kind of thing can happen, but don't throw your plant away, because all I did was I cut off all the leaves that were dropping off and going brown, and then I made sure I stayed up with the watering, kept it moist, and look at all this beautiful new growth. So don't give up on the plant. It will bounce back, and yeah, it will just thank you for keeping it nice and moist, and again, just bright indirect light. And I just think this is a really stunning plant and really worth the effort of rescuing too for me, because I really do love this plant. So I didn't want to just let it go in the bin. I really wanted it to recover, and luckily I got my wish. Next up is another fern. This is the blue star fern, and again this one loves to stay moist. I never let mine dry out, and one of the things I do as well to make sure that this doesn't get brown tips is I use filtered water, just using a normal filter jug that I use for my drinking water, because when I first got this I used tap water and I noticed there was some browning on it. So that's another tip to reduce browning. Use a water filter, and it filters out some of the chemicals and keeps your plants looking more healthy. But yeah, this one definitely loves moisture. It does like some humidity as well, so the perfect place for it is in your bathroom. I'd say this one is a little bit more forgiving than some other ferns. Again, it's easier. If you let it dry out just a little bit, once or twice, it's going to be fine. Unlike the zebra plant that I just showed you, this one will actually be fine. But if you keep it consistently moist, it's going to be at its best, and it's really going to thank you for it. And it grows these beautiful fronds, as you can see, really pretty, and it's got a kind of a blue sheen to it that I really love. But yeah, this and the other fern I showed you, the crocodile fern, I always recommend these to people who are beginners and are a little bit worried about ferns because they have a reputation for crisping up. These two ferns, they are really good for beginners, and I'd highly recommend them. Next up is the peace lily, and this goes for the ordinary version here and the variegated version too. These do like to stay moist. Now, it's not going to fall over and die on you if you forget to water it a couple of times. Peace lilies are known for being dramatic. When they want to be watered, they will droop their leaves. So if you let it get to this stage, don't worry, it'll be absolutely fine. But if you are prone to overwatering and you're looking for plants that really do love moisture, this is definitely one of the ones for you. This one is super easy to care for. It handles low light as well. And yeah, it just really does prefer to stay moist if you can do that for it. If you're the type of person that just can't help watering your plants too much, then peace lily is really forgiving, and yeah, it's really going to thrive under those sort of care conditions. But again, just remember that when I say moist, I don't mean wet. You definitely don't want to be soaking the soil and keeping it soaking wet, so just consistently moist, and make sure you drain any excess water out again as well with any of these plants. Next up is one of my favourite plants in the world right now. This is a Dieffenbachia, and I just really adore this plant. It brings me so much joy. It's really rewarding. This is another plant that you do not want to let dry out for a minute. It will not forgive you if you do let it dry out. It's far less forgiving than some of the other examples I've shown you. It likes to stay moist, and it will have a bit of a tantrum on you if you let it dry out too much. But if you keep it moist, it will reward you with so much lovely growth. And you can see this one has grown so much since I got it. It's really thriving. These plants are known for dropping a few leaves, getting a bit of yellowing when you first bring them home. This is just whilst they adjust. This is really normal, so don't worry. But after it's gone through that stage and you found it a nice spot in your home, just be sure to keep a check on that soil, water it before it gets dry. You don't want to let it dry out at all. And yeah, this is definitely one of the best moisture loving plants in my opinion, because it really brings that jungle vibe to your home, and it's got gorgeous variegation, which I really love to look at. Next is this Chlorophytum orchidastrum. This one prefers not to dry out, and it doesn't like the air to be too dry around it either. So you definitely don't want to put this one near a radiator. And again, just make sure to check the soil. When it feels like the top is drying out, give it some more water. Same advice as before, make sure it's not soaking wet because it won't like that, but just keep it consistently moist. And try not to let it dry out, because these can be prone to getting brown tips if you do let it dry out, which I know is very frustrating because they do look unsightly. But yeah, keep this one moist. Don't put it in direct sunlight, it likes sort of partial shade, and it should be very happy. And mine has been growing really well for me. It's putting out lots of new leaves. I haven't had it for that long, but I really enjoy this one. I love the orange and green combo. It's really pretty. Another stunning plant that likes to stay moist is this purple passion plant. And isn't it just so striking with that gorgeous purple colour? And the leaves are also really fuzzy too. When you stroke them, you can feel they've got lots of little fuzzy hairs all over. But this one likes to be in bright sun. Obviously be careful of direct sun, because that might be a little too much. Mine gets a couple of hours of direct sun kind of in the afternoon where it's at, and it seems fine. The rest of the time it gets bright indirect light, but this one does like to stay moist. It's not happy if it dries out. It will probably get all dramatic on you and droop if you do let it dry out. So make sure to keep this one moist and it should grow well for you. I'm really loving having this plant in my collection because I think it's probably the first purple plant that I've got, so I'm finding it really nice to have a pop of colour in the home. If you guys know of any other moisture loving plants that you'd like to let other people know about, let us know in the comments and I'll see you in the next video.